Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. All right.
Cool.
Welcome to this podcast is Uncalled For.
What's uncalled for about it?
Well, you can't tell anybody this.
I'm listening.
Oh my God, what are you doing? I didn't see the big deal about the human body.
I worship Cthulhu just for the free beer.
Yeah, and don't go to Sam's Club either.
But you didn't even give him a chance for a wild card spot.
What are we doing at Tijuana?
He's like, what did you just say?
Well, the name of this podcast is Stuff Uncalled For?
This podcast is uncalled for.
Podcast, all right.
Yeah, that was the most ridiculous ending to that game that I've ever seen.
Oh my gosh, I gotta hurry up. Oh my gosh, I gotta hurry up. Oh my gosh, I gotta hurry up.
We're looking at each other in the eye. We're not going to say anything derogatory to the other person. And, of course, neither of us is drunk.
So I don't hear Pope Francis saying that he's a prophet, seer, and revelator.
What planet are these people on?
And the book, thank you back from...
See, this is a disgrace.
How'd that happen?
And it's got Chick-fil-A. Hey, we're getting somewhere.
And now, your host for this podcast, Mike Chernefsky.
Fuji!
Welcome to the podcast, and welcome to another edition of Ski Recycle's Old Stuff. So 2015, I want to say, I was invited by the Greater Kansas City Women's Political Caucus, and even more specifically, Amber Versola, who unintentionally inspired the name of this podcast, to do a recording of a pretty important speech with a very important person. So who is this important person that I'm talking about? If you're in politics, you probably know who this is. Former Fort Worth City Council member, former member of the Texas Senate, and one-time gubernatorial candidate in Texas, who made a name for herself filibustering an anti-abortion bill for 13 hours. That's pretty damn impressive, and a very nice lady, too, I gotta say. So here is the audio from the presentation by former Texas State Senator Wendy Davis.
Tired when I was flying here today, and I feel so restored being with all of you, listening to the incredible stories of these two wonderful senators that have represented and continue to represent your interests here, meeting so many of the people that I met tonight, those who are in elected office, those who have had the courage to step up and run for office even if they didn't succeed, a city council candidate who has her name on the ballot right now, young women who not only are interested in perhaps pursuing a political career for themselves, but are working to make sure that even younger women are inspired to think about themselves potentially holding office one day. That is what this is all about. And I'm so proud and pleased to be a part of your program tonight and to help celebrate all that you do and all that you will continue to do. As I travel around, a lot of times people will ask me, where are your pink shoes? And of course, we have the shoes here this evening in another senator's spirit, and I thank her for wearing them on my behalf tonight. But when I'm asked that, it really got me thinking about that, about our shoes and those that we've been in and those that others are in. And I wrote my remarks tonight in the spirit of thinking about that. And I'll start by taking you to that day 2 years ago, almost exactly. It was June the 25th of 2013. It was a warm summer morning, a hot summer morning in Texas. And very early that morning, I found myself laying back on my bed, clenching a pillow over my face as a young woman doctor inserted a catheter into my bladder. And about an hour later, I walked out of my apartment in flat black shoes. I had on a light blue floral dress and a catheter bag tethered to my leg under that dress. And as the door shut behind me, I looked down at my feet and I thought, I don't know if these are going to give enough support for me for the day. So I ran back in. I grabbed my running shoes that were still dusty from the trail that I run on that encircles Lady Bird Lake in Austin. And a couple of hours later, I found myself standing on the Senate floor with those pink sneakers on, with these words coming out of my mouth. I intend to speak for an extended period of time on the bill. And that bill, of course, was Senate Bill 5, which was a multi-pronged bill with the stated intent of protecting women's health, but whose real purpose, as we all know, was to close as many abortion clinics in Texas as possible. A bill that, in the name of fighting for women's health, was, of course, no doubt going to endanger women's health. And so I've thought about that day and what brought me to that place, standing in that surreal moment in those particular shoes. And as I thought about that, my mind landed on a memory. In 1973, I am 10 years old. This time my feet are bare and they're covered in grass clippings. I am mowing my grandmother's yard and struggling with her non-motorized push mower. Inside the kitchen, she glances out at me, shaking her head at the haphazard rows that I am creating. She is and had always been a perfectionist, and she was not amused. She returned to her task, standing over the kitchen counter, the screen door open and the fan on, wearing the uniform that I will always remember her in, a floral house dress and faded slip-on canvas shoes. She had sweat pouring down her face and back, her long black hair pulled up tight behind her, working rhythmically with the pressure cooker hissing behind her. She is engrossed in a task that she had repeated for as long as she could remember, preparing jars to can vegetables that she has coaxed from her own garden. 6 decades earlier, in an old leather lace-up pair of her mother's low-heeled, sturdy shoes, she, a 6th grade educated 15-year-old, and my grandfather, a 4th grade educated 17-year-old, traveled by horse and wagon across the Texas Panhandle. They were returning from Arkansas, where they had gone to marry when my grandmother was only 13, and in her arms was her firstborn son, my Uncle Will. From there, she and my grandfather would travel from place to place, finding work as tenant farmers where they could. Approximately 10 years and 6 children later, my mother, the first of her only 2 daughters, would be born, the 7th of 14 children. And before long, and because she was the only girl at the time, my mother's days would be filled with the responsibility of keeping house in what was almost always a 2-room home. Standing in hand-me-down, faded, worn shoes of one of her older brothers, she would scrub clean their denim overalls. She would stand for hours and hours over the washboard, the ironing board, the kitchen stove, the butter churn. That would fill most of what my grandmother, my mother, and her sister, who came along, number 12 of the bunch, would ever know. And when my mother became a single parent, after my parents separated and she became the sole financial support to her 4 children, she entered the outside workforce for only the 2nd time in her life. She was armed with only a 9th grade education. To this day, some of my most vivid memories of her are her in that orange and white polyester uniform that was her Brahms ice cream and dairy store attire, and her shoes, always those white orthopedic comfort shoes. In them, she would stand for hours, scooping ice cream, flipping burgers, mopping floors, taking inventory. And late at night when she would come home, she would shed them, put her swollen feet up on the sofa, knowing that the next day and the next and for as many days after that she could envision, this would be her life. So these remarkable women, my grandmother and my mother, like so many grandmothers and mothers in this country today, slipped on or laced up their shoes fixed on a singular goal, to create a better life for their children than the one that they each had. That was the promise of the eras in which they grew up. If you work hard today, your tomorrow, and certainly your children's tomorrow, can be better than your yesterday. Last summer, I was privileged to hear the first President Clinton speak as part of the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the passage of the Civil Rights Act. He lamented that for the first time in many generations, there are millions of Americans who are not working for the promise of a better tomorrow. In fact, though they are working more hours and harder than ever before, they are struggling just to keep their heads above water. When I was a young, scared 19-year-old mom raising Amber on my own, though I had many dark days, and some literally dark because I would come home to find my electricity had been turned off, I knew that once I put my feet on the path of education, if I worked hard, I could create a better life for myself and for her. As many single mothers could stand before you and attest today, it wasn't easy. And as Diane said, I work a full and part-time jobs while going to school, but I was privileged compared to so many young women today, because my feet at that time had the possibility of stepping up one rung of the ladder after another. I was afforded some very important things that made that possible for me. Quality child care from a friend, affordable tuition at my community college, and health care and family planning services from a Planned Parenthood clinic near my home. That clinic was the only health care that I had for several years, and it made it possible for me to prevent another unplanned pregnancy, which would have completely derailed my opportunity for a better tomorrow. After 2 years in community college, and while still working 2 jobs, wearing the only pair of high heels that I owned that had the nails protruding through the heels, I clickety-clacked very proudly down a corridor at TCU on my way to an 8 a.m. English class. And even with the teasing of my professor, who would tell me that he always knew it was me coming from the sound of those shoes, I felt the pride of knowing that I was on my way up. 7 years later, remarried, and with my 10-year-old and 4-year-old daughters at my side, I walked across the stage at Harvard Law School to accept my diploma, this time wearing a new pair of pumps. And later, as Diane said, I went on to serve 9 years on the Fort Worth City Council and 6 years in the Texas Senate. If my grandmother could only see what her hard work had made possible for me. And of course, now I wear better shoes than she ever could have dreamed of owning. But I cannot help but remember what it was like to wear all of the others. Nor can I help forget those that my mother and my grandmother wore. Today, there are millions of American women who are working as hard as they can to create a brighter future for themselves and their children, but they are trapped in the quicksand of poverty, working 2 or 3 low-wage jobs to scrape by. And because wage increases haven't nearly kept up with inflation, the dollars that they earn today go even less far than those that I was earning in the 1980s. Affordable quality child care is almost an oxymoron in this country today. In more states than not, child care is more expensive than college tuitions are. College tuitions for those women who are trying to improve their lives are out of their reach, and in states like mine, family planning clinics are being shuttered as a result of politicians who are using women's health as a political wedge. In 2011 alone, an estimated 180,000 Texas women lost their only access to health care when over 70 family planning centers, not abortion clinics, were closed as a result of the legislature's decreed war on Planned Parenthood and a subsequent wholesale withdrawal of family planning and preventive care funding. So, my friends in this room, you know, as I do, that so many of our sisters today are stuck. They face stagnant wages and unequal pay, earning only 77 cents for every dollar that a man earns. It's even worse for our sisters of color, who make an average of 65 cents to every man's dollar. Did you know that 2/3 of all minimum wage workers in this country are women, or that 1/3 of them are supporting families with children on just $15,000 a year, or that women make up more than 70% of those who work for the sub-minimum wage level of $2.13 set for tipped workers? It should absolutely not be the case that people doing their best, working as hard as they can, are still living below the poverty line in this country. But it is the reality for so many. Meanwhile, American women are losing their ability to fight their way out of that quicksand of poverty. They lack the means to manage their fertility because reproductive rights are being stripped from them. And by lacking the means to manage their fertility, they lack the means to manage their lives. It is just that simple. I think that too often when we hear those statistics, and those of us in this room could probably recite them and many more about the impacts of legislation on women in this country today, they tend to begin to just wash over us. We become almost numb to the numbers. And meanwhile, sensible elected officials, Republicans and Democrats alike, have watched while ideologues have hijacked women's issues, playing upon voters' fears to advance their own agendas. These demagogues possess not a care or concern for the human fallout that they leave behind in the wake of their quest for power. And we find that we can make sound arguments about the fact that when women do better, we all do better until we are blue in the face. We can point out that GDP rises with pay equity, that our economy improves when wages are increased and buying power increases with it. But the demagogues have succeeded in playing on voters' fear that women's advancement will somehow harm them, that as men they might have to compete with women for their jobs, or perhaps their fear that their wives might abandon more traditional roles as wives and mothers. Meanwhile, women who've chosen those traditional roles may fear that their roles will be devalued. And each of those fears is preyed upon and played by politicians who are wise to the fact that inviting voters to fear women's empowerment plays well. No one is asking the real question. How will the children of women who had no choice but to bear them be clothed, fed, and educated if their mothers are trapped in poverty and working for the minimum wage? We've been divided into camps. Those who consider themselves feminists and those that believe that feminism stands for something bad, that it stands for something that it's not, that it's a requirement that we check our femininity at the door, that feminism means we have to surrender our desires to be wives and mothers. It is a successful divide and conquer strategy, pitting not only men against women's advancement, but sadly and more importantly, some women against it as well. So I have to ask, what might happen if we, as women, woke up to the reality that we are only as strong as the opportunities that are available to our sisters? If we fought alongside each other regardless of political perspectives or stations in life, understanding our shared stake in each other's advancement. If working women celebrated those women who have chosen to stay home and cared for their children. If stay-at-home moms cheered those women who are putting cracks into the glass ceiling. If we tried to view these issues through each other's perspectives. If we figuratively tried on each other's shoes. On the day of the filibuster, fearing that we were going to run out of personal testimonies to read, my staff put out a call on social media asking for more. And within hours, we had received over 16,000 stories, and behind each of them, 16,000 women, each asking that we consider the impact of the decision that we were making, not just on her, but on all the women who would one day stand in the shoes that she had once found herself in. Those human stories resonated. They were a wake-up call to Texans and beyond about the cost that women bear when politics tramples sound policy making. Somewhere in America today, someone's daughter, a 15-year-old woman wearing a dingy pair of sneakers that have long since ceased to be white, will double knot their gray laces knowing that she'll be running around all day. She'll rise before daybreak. She will feed and dress her months-old baby son. She'll rush down the street just in time to climb aboard a bus, lugging her baby, the stroller, and her backpack. She'll get off the bus, drop her child at daycare, and then she'll run to catch a second bus that'll take her to her dropout recovery high school. In the evening, she'll do the whole thing in reverse, day after day after day, because she knows that getting an education is her only hope for a better life for her and her son. Somewhere in America today, someone's mother, wearing black orthopedic shoes and the uniform issued by her employer, will be clearing the dishes from the dinner table tonight where her children are bent over their homework. In a little while, she'll climb in her car and she'll tense up while she prays that the motor will catch and start in her old 15-year-old car. She's on her way to her nighttime waitressing job at a 24-hour diner where she'll work for a guaranteed $2.13 an hour and hope for a better night of tips than the one she had previously. And she will put up with a lot for that to happen, even the occasional customer who treats her as though she's an item on the menu. And when her shift is over, she will return home to her sleeping children. It will be her turn now at the kitchen table as she bends over a stack of bills, trying to figure out how she'll pay them. Somewhere in America, someone's sister, an 18-year-old young woman, her heart filled with dreams of attending college, wearing no shoes, her bare feet up in the stirrups of a gynecological table, will listen as a doctor glides a sonogram wand across her tummy. She'll avert her eyes from the monitor, but she cannot tune out the sound of the doctor's voice methodically describing, as required by law, the development of fetal limbs, heart, and skull. And when the doctor finishes, the young woman will dress, putting on a pair of sandals before heading home to wait out the prerequisites of the law until she can come back the next day or the next and follow through with a decision that she had long since weighed and made. So my fellow sisters, we of course have been witness and participants in a long, slow climb to assure that women are equipped to choose the path that is best for them and to have the tools to succeed in their journey. But we find ourselves slipping back down the hill that we all worked so hard to climb. There is hope, though. I truly believe there is, if only we will work to identify with each other's struggles. A few weeks ago, I was privileged to hear two women give testimony to the power that we gain when we set aside our differences and we see each other through the lenses of our shared experiences. Robbie Damlin and Bushra Awad are unlikely friends. They are mothers on opposite sides of a bitter conflict between their respective homes of Israel and Palestine, and they both have lost sons to that conflict. In their shared grief, they forged an amazing friendship, one which gave them the resolve to turn their private tragedies into a force for change. When I heard them speak at the Women in the World conference, I couldn't help but notice their footwear. Each was wearing black and white high-top tennis shoes, the uniform attire of members in the Parents Circle Families Forum, an organization of over 600 Palestinian and Israeli families that have lost a loved one to the conflict. Their shoes, a recognition that despite their vast cultural differences and warring factions, they share a common bond. They are now literally wearing each other's shoes. And of course, they symbolize the power that comes from recognizing our shared humanity, and we can all learn from their example. They remind me of another great lady that I admire. She stands atop the Texas Capitol. It is a statue, actually, of a woman. In her right hand, she holds a sword lowered, and in her left hand, she raises a lone star proudly above her. She is called the Goddess of Liberty. She is porcelain white, her eyes are large, and they reflect a steely resolve. And late at night, you can look up at the goddess of liberty and see her illuminated high above the Capitol dome. Through the wind and rain and brutal Texas heat, the goddess of liberty continues to stand. She stands for freedom and wisdom and justice. She is a symbol of everything that I was fighting for on that June day when I stood those many hours. Freedom and justice for women and the wisdom of lawmakers to stop using women's bodies as pawns in their political games. Appropriately and beautifully, it was not me that carried that filibuster past the midnight deadline. It was the thousands of people, women and men who were there, who'd had their own personal experiences that they wanted to share, who had listened as I read the heart-wrenching personal stories of so many women and their families on the floor that day. And there they were, demanding to be heard. And when their voices were artificially silenced through the parliamentary maneuverings that they saw occur that day, they rose. Like the goddess of liberty with that lone star raised above her head, they stood for something, for themselves, for each other, for women that they have never met nor will ever know. And for at least a moment, they understood their own power. That power is in each and every one of us. The power to place ourselves in each other's shoes. The power to unite each with the other toward the common cause of seeing and understanding each other, bound by our shared human experiences of joy and triumph, of failure and sorrow. So, if I could leave anything with you tonight, it would be to encourage you to tap in and hold on to and use that power with everything that you've got. To take moments where we find disappointment in what's happening in the political arena and to take the energy that comes from that and forge ahead and fight for the things that we know are right. We need to use that power in our conversations with other people, in our donations to candidates and to causes, and of course in the most important place that we speak of all, the ballot box. So whether we are D's or R's or I's, let's vote with our feet in the collective shoes of the women who are so desperately counting on us to put people in office who will fight for them. And let's act every day as though our actions today will create the better tomorrows that our sisters are depending on, because quite literally they do. Thank you very, very much. I'm definitely going to help in any way I can. I sure am. Thank you. I'd be proud to do that.
What was the most difficult thing about your 13 hours filibuster?
It was simultaneously the most difficult, but also the thing that gave me the most energy. And it was watching my colleagues act in a way that was not in keeping with the way normally senators respect a filibuster. In Texas, because a filibuster is truly a filibuster, it's a revered tradition. And whether you agree or disagree with what the senator is filibustering, the typical tradition is to treat it with a great amount of deference and respect. So I was surprised that day when I saw, and later I learned, they had made up their minds ahead of time that by 11:45 p.m. they were going to have brought the filibuster to an end so they could call up an important transportation bill that needed to pass, one which we offered to come before the filibuster so that we could move it off the floor, and which they rejected. But I noticed as I was speaking that senators were taking turns watching me, that they'd assigned certain periods of time that were their period to be watching, whether I touched my desk or did anything in any way that they could call some sort of a strike against. And it was so disappointing to see the strikes that were called. They were absurd. I had 2 germaneness strikes, one for talking about the prior session when so much money was removed from family planning, which of course played into why it was so important to assure the continued opportunity for women to access abortion facilities. And then one when I talked about the 24-hour waiting period, the sonogram bill that had gone into place in the prior session, and the cumulative impact on women of that law added together with the laws that were being considered that day. That was completely out of the tradition, as I said, of the Senate. And it angered me so much to see that that was happening as the day wore on, that it really helped me put my head down and stay razor focused in what I was doing, and honestly to forget about the clock and forget about everything that was going on around me and to just keep going. And of course I couldn't help but be inspired by all of the people that were there. And the remarkable thing that occurred throughout the day, I had no way of knowing, of course, that anyone outside of our Capitol grounds was watching, but I did know that something extraordinary was happening in the Capitol itself, because I could literally feel it coming to life underneath my feet, just roaring from time to time and then subsiding. And I knew that I certainly was not alone that day. It was wonderful to know that.
But it's obvious you did not have the practice of dismissal.
No. Now, there could have been a call of the question, and it could have ended it instantly. That has never occurred in a Texas filibuster before, and it's my understanding, I learned later on, there was a big fight among the Republican Senate caucus about whether they would call the question, and some of them, including the person who is currently our lieutenant governor, were arguing that that's what they should do. They decided to be a little more sneaky about it than that. Yes.
I have a friend here in Kansas City. Her name's Christine Schuck. She wrote a book called The War on Drugs, an Old Wives' Tale, and she talks about her experience as a wife and a mother. Her husband was arrested and convicted of a marijuana felony during the jury. And when that happened, that her entire family life changed. She became the sole breadwinner of the house, and went through it's a rather difficult process. I don't understand how intrusive these things can be. But, you know, on a broader scale, you know, I see a lot of people, families who are affected by mass incarceration and drug prohibition. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, it is a terrible problem in America today, and the justice system clearly is not working in a way that's really creating any real impact on our desire to decrease the use of drugs. And people's lives, of course, are being ruined depending on their ability to pay adequate counsel to represent them in the judicial system. And it shouldn't be about that. And we know in America our prisons are overflowing. So many of them with people who had somewhat minor drug possession charges, many of them who are serving more time for these very light offenses when people who have committed much more egregious crimes against society are getting off completely or with far less time serving. And you know, it's one of those kind of silent problems out there that unless there are warriors for justice fighting against it, it's not going to change. But I am pleased to see some states taking the approach of decriminalizing small possessions or certainly decreasing what the criminalization would be, because you're right, it has a devastating impact. And heaven forbid, all of us who have ever engaged in any sort of minor illicit activity like that would be serving those same sentences. It's something that we all need to continue to strive to improve, for sure. Yes.
I know there's a lot of fabulous young women in here. What got you to make the decision, I'm going to run, I'm going to kill it, and I'm going to be awesome?
So we all know that it's much harder for women to just decide they're going to dive in, right? And men tend to have much more of the bravado that makes them feel encouraged to do that. So first of all, we know we need encouragement, and I certainly needed encouragement. I ran for city council when I was in my 30s. I lost the first time that I ran in a runoff election by 90 votes, so it just killed me. And it was kind of the first thing I'd ever really tried to do that I hadn't succeeded at. But the good thing about it is it gave me, the desire to really push and try to make it happen in the future. But in that 9th year on the city council, I had decided it was going to be my last term. I didn't think I was going to run for office again, and there were some leaders in my community from the African American and Latino neighborhoods who came to me and said, we really think we have a chance to win this seat. It was a Republican seat, and as Diane said, it was held by a longtime incumbent, and the odds were completely stacked against us, and literally every newspaper in the state wrote us off as though we were crazy. But we had the power of people behind us, and we worked as hard as you could possibly imagine. And it was very inspiring to me to see that against the odds you can sometimes win, and that's probably what gave me the absurd courage to run for governor in a state like Texas. But I'm glad I did. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. It was a great experience. And I want young women to see that when we do lose, we just pop right back up and we keep on fighting and passionately working on the things that matter to us, and hopefully setting an example for young women like you. Yes?
So I have a follow-up question. Do you think you will run again for federal, state, or local office?
I might. I certainly would be honored if that privilege opened up again for me, but I'm working right now on starting a national women's initiative to take my passion for public service and direct it in a different way. I know you don't have to hold office to be impactful. Certainly so many people in this room could tell that story, and I'm inspired by the senator's ever-changing life that she lived and all the different careers that she managed in her time. So who knows what the road holds ahead. But I have learned in my life that if I'm working on something I really care about, it leads to the place I'm supposed to go. So I'll just be open to that.
Well, if you do, please send us all an invite to your first fundraiser.
Will this presentation be available to those who were not able to come tonight?
Yes, behind you, someone's taping it actually, so I think they were going to make it available. Yeah.
Perfect.
Every single moment I ran, one thing that I was so prepared to answer was, what are you going to do this time?
Oh, yes. I got asked that all the time.
The funny thing is, I never got asked it.
Really?
It might be because I've been a single mom for so long, but my married friends that I've said, what do you do with your kids? What about them? Is there a time when you were asked a question, what are you going to do with your daughter? Or what are you going to do with your kids? For instance, when you went to Harvard or TCU or wherever that you encountered something similar, and how did you handle it?
So, especially when I ran for city council the first time, and I was 30, I think I was 35 years old. My daughters were fairly young, and I got asked that question more by women than by men. And I was always just taken aback, well, you wouldn't have asked my husband that same question. And that's usually what I would say to people after I learned to grow a little bit more of a backbone about it. But then in my gubernatorial race, I was so dismayed to see the questioning of my time in law school and the way that my family balanced that and what we went through as a family to make that possible for me and to keep our girls healthy and whole through the process. It was mind-boggling to me to see the standard by which women candidates are measured, and that there wasn't nearly the outcry against that I think there should have been. And honestly, I'm guilty of it too, and I've thought a lot about it post-election, that as women, one of the best things I think we can do for other women candidates, when we're experiencing that and when we see women candidates experiencing it, we need to call it out for what it is immediately, because it does have an impact. A lot of times people are reacting to those messages subconsciously. They don't even really think that they're having a sexist perspective, for example. But when you name it, they have to own that they're feeling that way and they're thinking that way. And I just read this fascinating book by a professor at Berkeley Law School, Ian Haney Lopez, called Dog Whistle Politics. And he talks about, he goes through a series of presidential campaigns and how presidential candidates learned that if they were overtly racist in their message, that people didn't respond to it because they didn't want to own that part of who they were consciously. But when they were more subtle about racism in their campaigns and they invited people to react to the fears that they might have and the biases that they had, but to do it much more subtly where even in their consciousness they might not have to admit it to themselves, then that worked. And he pointed out in President Obama's first campaign, when he was catching so much flack because of his minister's comments, and it wasn't really until it was noted that there was a racial component to the accusations that were being made and a lot of the statements that were being made, that it finally started losing steam in terms of the impact. And it's because people were reminded, that's what you're responding to, so guard yourself, think about it. And I think as women candidates, we need to do that more, and certainly we're going to have plenty of opportunities with Hillary Clinton on the ballot. I think we're going to see a lot of that, and it's up to us really, if we hear our friends and acquaintances buying into it, to kindly, you don't have to be caustic about it, but to remind them that that's a double standard and not one by which we ought to be choosing the people we elect. Okay, one more question.
What would be the best piece of advice that you would give to young women who are looking to run for political office?
Do it. Statement, right? Just do it. Yeah. Well, she wouldn't say that about politics, right? But she would tell you that about the things that you truly cared about and wanted to do. I know. Your grandmother. We're talking about your grandmother. Yeah. But look for women role models. We need more and more of them, obviously, but don't for a moment doubt that you have absolutely as much going for you and as much capacity and capability to be a good public servant. And in fact, you have more. Because we have so few women who are actually representing us at every level of government, the percentage, of course, doesn't anywhere near match the percentage of who we are in this country. And as a consequence of that, the kinds of things that are happening right now will keep happening until we have women who understand the real world impacts of these decisions are there to fight to make sure they don't happen. Thank you very much.
All of you. Hope to see you November 20th at the Torch Dinner.
This podcast is Uncalled For is hosted, produced, and edited by Mike Chernevsky. Opening music is Fantasia by Kevin MacLeod at Incomptech.com. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. Outro music for this episode is Hometown Street Life at 397 by Lobo Loco. Licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 license. Please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast through your favorite podcasting platform. Like our Facebook page at facebook.com/uncalledforpodcast and check out our blog with show notes at uncalledfor.home.blog.
Thank you so much for listening. We will see you next time.